tēnā koutou katoa, ko Eleonora te maunga, ko Naramine te awa, ko Guy Maragal te tangata whenua, e tipu ake aho i Sydney, ke te whanganui a tāra aho, e noho ana, ko Samuel aho, tēnā koutou katoa. I am zooming in from Thorndon on Ngāti Toa Whenua and sitting under the shade of Ahu Mairangi at the moment, which actually everything is kind of grey today in Wellington. I'm a board member for Same But Different, and I want to welcome you to our final panel for our 2022 festival. Before we begin, I'm just going to do our little plug for our sponsors. Thank you to Creative New Zealand, Auckland Pride, the Peter Rule Foundation, Unity Books, Rainbow New Zealand Charitable Trust, Auckland Council Libraries, and the Coalition for Books. It's because of their wonderful support that we can put this on, that we can make it free. And it's thanks to you all for coming along that we have the joy and delight of making this happen. We also have New Zealand Sign Language interpreters for this session. So if you want to use them, make sure to pin their video. I think we're going to try and make it so you can always see them, but you can also pin their video as well. And that's thank you to the Access Pride Fund. So we're very excited about that. I'll be chairing this panel. My name's Sam, and I'm here with R.W.R. McDonald. And I'm going to do an intro and then hand it over. So R.W.R. or Rob is the author of The Nancys, an adult crime fiction in the tradition of a whodunit murder mystery set in a fictitious small town in South Otago with a cast of fabulous, quirky, and totally out of control characters. He is an award-winning author, a Kiwi living in Melbourne with his 2 daughters and 1 Harry cat who is currently locked outside. The Nancys won the Nio Marsh Award for Best Novel in 2020 and was shortlisted for the Ned Kelly Award for Best Crime Novel and was highly commended at the Victorian Premier's Literary Awards in 2017. Nancy Business is the sequel to this smash hit, which came out last year and carries on the adventures of Tippy Chan and her babysitters Uncle Mike and boyfriend Devon. We are very excited to have you here, Rob. I'm so excited to be able to interview you and just wondering if you would like to start us off with an intro.
Yeah, Kiara, thank you, Sam. And I'm thrilled to be here, to be speaking with you, and thank you to everyone who's come along this morning and to be part of such a fantastic and incredible festival. As I was speaking to Sam just yesterday, was so great. So yeah, to be a panelist, I'm thrilled. So I'd just like to start off by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on, which sovereignty was never ceded. I'd like to also pay my respects to their elders, both past, present, and future.
Awesome. So I thought we would do this session in a couple of different parts. I sent through a very detailed, sectioned out
Love that. Yeah.
thing. So we'll start with some questions about the books. We'll talk about the process of writing and getting published. We'll do a what's next. And then towards the end of the session, we will do a Q&A from the audience. So if you have those questions, pop them in the chat or in the Q&A function. This session does go from 11 to 12, not 12:30, which I think was on the Eventbrite. So it's just an hour long. So if you have friends who are sleeping in, make sure you get them here now. Thank you for joining us. It's early in the morning on a Sunday, and I always appreciate it when people get up early.
My pleasure.
So let's start with the books. I think that maybe give us a rundown of the Nancys group, which are the kind of central figures in the book.
Yeah, so the story, it's adult crime fiction, so I'll make that distinction straight away, because we do have an 11-year-old narrator, which is schoolgirl Tippy Chan, who's the book starts off, and this isn't a spoiler, her Uncle Pike and Devon, who are sort of C-grade celebrities in Sydney, are coming over for 2 weeks. And what we find out in that first chapter is Tippy's father died 9 months earlier, and there's just her and her mum, and they've been struggling with around the grief, and her mum's had to take on extra shifts and work. So you have these uncles coming over, who well, Uncle Pike, Devon it's a new relationship for Uncle Pike. He hasn't been so successful in any kind of long-term relationship, so this one has been going for 3 months. It's the first time he's bringing someone home. Also, the small town that Tippy and her mum live in, and in fact, the house is where Uncle Pike grew up, and he escaped there when he was 16. So he's coming home with
some baggage.
With some extra baggage, yeah. So they get home. One thing we learn is Uncle Pike and Tippy share a love of Nancy Drew. So Tippy's got Uncle Pike's old Nancy Drew books, plus some from Pike's mum, and she's been gagging to have her own mystery to solve. And the opportunity arises when her school teacher is found murdered. So as a sort of bonding sightseeing idea, which I, as a parent, would never allow, they decide to try and solve the mystery. And there is good intention behind it, from whether it's, misguided, is Pike sees this as a way to try and help Tippy through her grief of her father.
I think it's quite interesting, those three characters. You could have chosen the novel to be told through any one of those voices, but you chose Tippy. How did that come about?
Yeah, absolutely. So it actually came about, I had finished to write just first draft film scripts that were never, they were just more about learning how to put a story together and learning about writing. And then my next project, so one was a horror, one was a fantasy kind of, gay romance between a Viking and a knight, that kind of thing. And
I hope these still come about.
Well, they're still in the drawer. And so for my next one, I thought I would love to do a murder mystery, because I've always loved them. I love the puzzle element. I love particularly amateur detectives, because they're like the reader. They don't have these special access to police information or any kind of information, really. So I was thinking, okay, and I just started writing, and the first thing that came was this child's voice, and they were talking about a murder, and it was following that thread, because I was like, well, who's this child? Why are they weren't excited, but they were like really invested in solving this murder, and they were pretty fearless about it. And so I sort of followed that thread. Who is this, and who would allow a child to pursue this? And it was like, okay, it's not her parents, it's her uncle. Okay, this is who their uncle is, and oh yeah, he's from that small town, he's got a boyfriend. And that's how Tippy and Uncle Pike and Devon came about. And I did explore that idea of having, say, Uncle Pike or Devon tell the story, but it just organically had come through Tippy. And I love that idea of, I wanted to quickly, I wanted to quickly, as in early on, realized that I wanted to tell this through a child, because I wanted this world to be a post-homophobic world. I wanted to, through a child's eyes, for that equality, almost, of people. Not to say that in Riverstone, there is racism, there's misogyny, there is those other real world problems. And so, yeah, it also gave us a chance. I guess I wanted this book to be as accessible as possible as well. I didn't want it to only sit in the queer section of the bookshop. I wanted it up the front as well as, and yeah, I think by going through Tippy and for bringing on those readers who wouldn't normally go to the queer section and pick a book, it allowed, I guess, access, and for those readers to start to build a relationship with our community. So that was, I guess, the lofty goal, but it was, nice. Yeah.
It's quite interesting, those trio, all three of them have these quite childlike characteristics in lots of ways. Devon and Tippy get along on a kind of spiritual sister kind of level. And Uncle Pike has a little bit of kind of Peter Pan syndrome going on around his approach to relationships and things. Yeah. But it's interesting that you say that Tippy becomes the kind of easier gateway in some ways. Do you find, you've got two daughters, did you find getting into the mindset of a young girl, did your role as a dad play a part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would have been a very different book had I not. So I first came up with the idea in 2006, and my first daughter was born 2007, and then my youngest in 2008. So there was a bit of a gap before I sort of got back to writing. But yes, it would have been quite a different book, because definitely my experience as a parent went through those characters, and through Howland and through Pike and Devon's relationship with Tippy. I think I would have been, perhaps, I don't think scared's the right word, but writing a book with a child and two adults, and that they're hanging out, for me now, being a parent, it's just like, yeah, well, this is just, family, right? But I think as a single gay man without access to that, it would have been a lot more difficult, perhaps, and not as, I don't think, as authentic. And I hadn't seen that pairing, and I wanted to see different heroes. Like, we've grown up with straight white cis male heroes, and now we're starting to branch out, and we're seeing more at least females, but cis straight females. So it's good to, but it's great. We need to see more of those. I love, anything that's gender diverse or female led. Like, that's what we're watching at our house, because we need to see these other voices and see these other heroes and how they interact and what they do, and that they're just as capable or not more, and they've got different skills and things they can pull on. And that's what I want to write. Like, I'm interested. What happens here? What happens with these? How do they interact? What, what's going on there. So yeah.
I get the sense as well, like one of the beauties of the book is that you've set it in this small town, and there's quite a collection of people who inhabit the town in the kind of way that, like Schitt's Creek, it's post-homophobic, but they're still very larger than life characters. And I get the sense that you kind of enjoy putting different characters together and seeing what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea of just, this small town, and then just, with Devon in the supermarket with his, sequin tourist shirt, and just zero fucks, basically. Sorry if that's too early in the morning for that. Yes, and I also love that. I mean, every small town, and anyone who's from a small town knows that you've got these larger than life characters that are in there, right? Everyone knows Lorraine, or knows Mr. Brown, or they know these kind of characters. So just to be able to turn the dial up and just have fun with that, absolutely. And them interacting, and then you have secondary characters that then may never have bumped into each other, that bump in, and they just like hate each other, or think what the fuck.
And in some ways, Riverstone is quite a progressive town. It's got a gay Māori lesbian mayor, but it's also has those kind of tropes of rural small town New Zealand, of like the beauty pageant that Melanie enters in the first book, and her speech at the end, just had me in tears.
Thank you. Yes, well, I wanted to show that, and that was also for Pike. So Pike coming back with his baggage, and what do you do when you've got this trauma and shame, and a place that was awful to you no longer exists, and is actually the opposite. And how do you deal with that? And so then it becomes about his own internalized homophobia and him having to address that. But yeah, I wanted to also show, like I was saying, with the racism and misogyny that still exists, and it's kind of that thing, and we obviously see it here in the real world, where you have these sort of unquestioned things that, when they are questioned, people are like, oh yeah, people usually white people are like, so like the beauty contest where everyone's white, and it's just like, oh yeah, and why is that, and how's that happening? What's the systems behind it that's allowing that to continue, and should it continue? And obviously, no, it shouldn't. So, and I liked having Melanie as that sort of social justice kind of progressive voice, that she could then have that discussion with Pike as well, who's from that side of things in Sydney. So yeah.
There's also something about the fact that you've got this biracial 12-year-old character who's, in her naivety, can kind of call out some of that stuff as well, because she's kind of like, what the fuck? What's going on? And what are these adults doing? Yeah.
And so so how Tippy came about was through that process where I was discovering I work in the international education space. And so when I was looking at qualities for Tippy, one of the things I really admire or love working in that space is, international students who come over, just the courage and resourcefulness, resilience, for a lot, they're first in family, they're carrying the weight of that responsibility. It also had quite a bit to do with mainland Chinese students who would come over and have to learn English, and just, the culture being so different. So that's where Joe, or Wei Feng Chan, Tippy's dad, came from, and Helen, her mum's Pakeha. And then this idea that that Joe Wei Fang, took on this English name Joe, basically went the full assimilation route. And I'd like to think that had Joe lived, then he would have rediscovered and reconnected more with his Chinese culture. And so Tippy's growing up sort of, and I talk a lot with my friends with Tippy's lived experience. My literary agent is of that lived experience, and I talked to her and I was like, "Oh my God, should I be writing this?" She's like, "Yes, you should." But I'm so hyper aware about it, and it needs to be nuanced. It needs to be as authentic as a Pākehā man can write this. And it is this thing of growing up biracial, wanting to pass as Kiwi, and then when you are hitting puberty or you're getting a bit older, depending on your parents, of course, and what's going on culturally at home, but then reconnecting with that other side and that other culture, and bringing those two together. So that's what's really going to be happening in the third book is Tippy, and Tippy does have that connection because she has her grandma, her Nai, who is the one who is keeping that going. And Tippy does see it around, like you have that thing with Jess Chan, who's like, I don't know, third or fourth generation New Zealander, who's mainland Chinese ancestors came over for the gold rush, and Tippy and them being sort of lumped in the same thing. And it's like, well, no, she's second generation biracial, so they're not. So it's making sure that there's that nuance around experience as well, but not whitewashing it. Like if there was racism around and Tippy's not experiencing any of that, then that's not going to work either.
Yeah, and I think that kind of comes through, particularly in the Nancy business, as the scene where they're doing the memorial about the 1 year after Joe's death, and her kind of navigating, well, a whole lot of adult kind of stuff of like Uncle Pike's reaction and Helen's reaction, and she's got Nai on the iPad zooming in, and all these things are just not kind of gelling together, and she's a 12-year-old and she has to grapple with that.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that you haven't shied away with other themes in the book beyond racism, but talking about grief and mental illness and dealing with the impacts of trauma, which, Tippy's hasn't had a great first 12 years. She's had to cope with a lot.
Yeah.
And it's really lovely to watch the way that you're kind of dealing. She's kind of processing that stuff, but you also watch these adults grappling with the same things in the background and sometimes not doing it so great. Yeah. Like the idea of the Nancys, Uncle Pike is setting that group up in order to help Tippy with her grief, but like they're also investigating a very grisly murder.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing, it's Tippy's helping them, like, and each of them are actually getting something from it. And when they are, the three of them together, it's quite I guess greater than the sum of its parts, or it's not like I never make fun of murder or the victims or anything like that, but it's very dark, extreme case to be taking a 11-year-old on. So yes, not something I would recommend in the real world. But there's that fascination that, and I see it in my kids, that kids have with absolute darkness. And I think that's why zombies are so absolutely popular. So when I was talking to my kids, so I made a pact very early on, between myself and my kids, that I wasn't going to rip off any of their childhood memories or anything that they'd done. But what they were fantastic for was just running lines like, would you say this? Is this a, and if, they look at me blankly and go, what is, abhorrent, then I go, okay, we'll take that out. So they were great. And also just running through scenarios, like obviously not to graphic details, but like, yeah. So they were great sense checkers, and just to try and get that authenticity. But also what I wanted to show with that murder, and then the subsequent and Nancy business with the town explosion, is this world that my kids and this generation have been born into and grown up in. So when my kids were born, we had, beheading videos on YouTube, and then the Western world was suddenly, there were bombs, and now we've got a pandemic. It's like, it's not the childhood that I grew up in. And I kind of wanted to sort of represent that, but obviously in a small town and in South Otago. But that was sort of what I was pulling on there as well. Also, this thing, I think, with cozy mysteries, amateur detective, small town, where the reader for a long time has gotten away with, oh, well, it was just an elderly person and they fell off a cliff, or they got, they had a poisonous cup of tea. And it's like, well, it's still a murder. Someone still died. So I'll give you murder. There's sort of all those parts of it going into it. Which is
and especially with Devon in the second book, is really grappling with the content of the first book, but also he's a first responder to the explosion, and kind of having to deal with a lot of trauma, and what that you it's like you don't let them kind of get away with it being fluffy, and yet there's such humor and lightness to these books. So, and I feel like you play a lot with humor and the joy of what it is to be kind of a kooky character.
Yeah. I really needed there to be, so they're put in these extreme situations. I didn't want to hit reset at the start of Nancy business. It's like, no, they've seen something, like Devon's seen something traumatic. That's going to have an impact, and they've just solved this murder, and I obviously don't want to give any spoilers, but it's cost them, and each time they do this, it's going to cost them. And it's that the old be careful what you wish for, right? And but I wanted them innately to be optimists, which again was another choice around having to be as a narrator, because I think with crime fiction, if you've got someone, there's the alcoholic police detective, but part of the reason perhaps that they're alcoholic is because they've been seeing dead bodies for a decade. So I wanted to have that innate optimism and glass half full. And where we sort of, I guess, Uncle Pike has I don't know if he's got a glass, but I wanted them. This is what they're like normally outside of a mystery. So why shouldn't they be like that in the mystery?
Yeah,
and it is, and I think it's part of finding joy and humor and laughter is part of resilience, right? And it's part of our community, the queer community, and that's why, because we've gone through shit and we've had to challenge, in just about everyone's case, reality, right, of what we've grown up in, this expectation that this is who you are and this is who you will be versus who we are and who we need to be. So I think that's one of our gifts, and I think as a queer community, we're very funny people.
Yes. Yeah. And
And we
kind of
enjoy,
have that dark sense of humor as well, I think,
yeah.
of being
And we
able to
enjoy,
laugh.
we enjoy to laugh, and you know, it's not long when you get two queer people together and sing this laughter. Like it's just the way we are.
I think that segues nicely into Uncle Pike and Devon. That Uncle Pike's a hairdresser, Devon is a designer, and those two are kind of stereotypical kind of gay mask careers, and yet these two don't seem like stereotypes at all, even though they're dealing with some of the things that we have seen before in terms of coming out and dealing with homophobia and things like that. They're really navigating it in a fresh way that I haven't seen before.
Oh, that's great to hear. Thank you. Well, so what I wanted to do is really, so 2006 when I had the idea and I had these characters sort of forming and percolating in my head, but it was 2014 which really motivated me to write, and that was when I read about Michael Moronis, who in the States he was severely bullied for his love of My Little Pony. He was
Oh, yes.
11, and his mum found him, and he'd hung himself. He died recently in October last year, but you know, mum managed to save him, but he had massive brain injury and was, you know, on. Yeah, his life was never the same. And I just remember at that time just going, this shit's going to stop. Like it's just horrendous. And for something so joyful as My Little Pony and his love for that he would feel, you know, he would get so severely bullied to that stage. So yeah, so I thought, well, you know, what can I do? And I knew I had these characters, and so really, when I was writing, you know, that first draft, it's about a celebration of camp and how I think the bravery and just being yourself and being out there and being fucking dialing it right up, and I love this idea of, because you know there are gay men at the top of their game in styling and designing and hairdressing, but we've never seen them outside of that space. Like it's always been that. So why not show them out in the field, you know, solving a mystery, or you know, and being role models for kids, and you know, and exploring all of these other things outside of just the professional. And so that's what I wanted to do. I was like, no, let's celebrate that, and you know that these two are, you know, very good at what they do professionally, and also see how that would play out, yeah, in Riverstone, New Zealand, as well, which is kind of part of the joy of it, I think.
Yeah, and they still find a way to have their kind of professional joy and love. Both of them seem very passionate and find ways to make that happen in Riverstone. I think what we'll do now is just have a short 5-minute break,
Yep.
just to give people a bit of a rest, and then come back and talk a bit about Riverstone and then the process of writing. If you have any questions, make sure to put them in the Q&A function. Otherwise, we will be back just after 22. So 11:40. 11:41, we will be back. I'm just waiting for the time to tick over officially to 11:41. But it's nice, we've got some questions coming through the chat now. Megan asks, and this actually fits in quite well with the question I was going to ask around the location of the book. It's set in Riverstone. Megan asks, was the location a deliberate choice, or did you try out other settings for the book?
Yeah, great question. So when I was going through that, I guess, writing process, we're coming up with the story. In terms of setting, so I grew up near Waka in South Otago, so half an hour drive to Balclutha. So, and my brother is still on the farm back there. My dad semi-retired to Balclutha for a number of years before him and my stepmom moved to Dunedin. So it's an area that I obviously grew up in. I've returned to up until the COVID, up until the pandemic, like at least twice a year, if not more, but every year of my life. So I moved to Melbourne in 2001. So it's a place that's here. Like I can navigate the roads and see, it's just and I just think it's a perfect setting because you've got this rural land, you've got the beautiful native bush, you've got wild coastline, you've got this town which is divided by a bridge, and you've got the Clutha River through it. So visually it's beautiful, and I just thought, why not? And there hasn't been that much fiction set around there, and certainly not really crime fiction. I mean, we've got Vanda Simon, Matara, which is just a bit further south. So that was why I thought, no, I'm gonna do it here. The reason why it's Riverstone and not Balclutha is because it's fictitious, and my writing teacher at the time said, unless you're going to get it absolutely spot on, the details, and the swing has red paint, and then make it fictitious, because it gives you much more leeway, and it really has. I've been able to move streets around and do that, but overall it's Balclutha. And also the reason why Riverstone was paying homage to Nancy Drew's town of River Heights, so I was kind of playing on that as well.
It was really fun reading it, because I spent quite a long time in Dunedin, and I was like, this is Balclutha, and this is Balclutha, and the bridge plays such an important role in the Nancy business, that it was like, yeah, it's quite. Yeah. Have you had feedback from the people of Balclutha?
Yeah. No, it's been positive, because I think I do love the place. I went through the whole as a teenager, this is a dump, and I hated it, and then it wasn't until I started, I went overseas and came back and got, actually, this is really beautiful. And then as I get older, I'm more and more fond of it. Interesting. I got contacted, through email by a number of people who had experienced like Pikes, and they had left the place back in the 80s or 70s because of similar reasons, and that was really interesting. So it was great to hear from them, and so it's been positive. It's definitely been positive. And now when I go back, and I go back with the kids, and they're like, oh my God. And well, the first thing they wanted to see was where Tippy's teacher had been murdered. So, on brand. But yeah, no, it's been a really good reception.
Oh, yay. Wonderful. Just shifting gears a little bit into the process of writing, that you've delivered these 2 books quite fast, and I believe that you're working on the next one. What's your process in terms of writing?
Yeah, so with the Nancys, I hadn't. So we had the kids. I was working. I'm a co-parent, so co-parent with a lesbian couple who then split. So we're actually three households. So Excel spreadsheets for that. So yeah, between parenting and I was working full time, and then I was doing a study, and that was a master's to help with my work. So once I finished the master's, I didn't want to lose that time, and I'd never ever prioritized my writing before. And I saw this article about Faber Academy, and it sounded great. It was face to face, two fantastic teachers, Paddy O'Reilly and Tony Jordan, who were also novelists, who taught at university. It was very practical based, and that's what I needed. I just wanted something practical. I didn't want to do necessarily do another master's. So I thought, okay, well, I've got the Nancys, so let's try writing a first draft. So it took me a year. I'm very slow on the first draft, but then I'm sort of pick up speed. So that was 2017. I'd entered it in a couple of unpublished manuscript competitions, which is kind of embarrassing because I think one that I entered, it was like my first draft, which looking back was just anyway. Entered it, and then I got highly commended in the Victorian Premier's Literary Awards, which then led to my current agent getting in contact. And then, so that's Grace Heifetz at Left Bank Literary. And one of the things Grace does with her writers is editorial with you, which is fantastic. So with Grace is how did probably another 3 drafts before it was ready for submission. And then we submitted it in 2018. While it was on submission, I started writing Nancy business. So that's my big tip to any emerging writers out there, is when it's on submission, just start something else. Because, you're just refreshing that email all the time. And it was a bit of a risk, right? Because we hadn't sold the Nancys. I had no idea and didn't know, if the Nancys was going to sell or whatever. So since then I've been writing. So I write, I would say, pretty much every day, but I'm not someone who is, get up at 5:30 in the morning and write for an hour every day, that kind of thing. If I did that, I'd just set myself up for failure. It's like a diet or gymnasium or something. Yeah. But what I did try to do, and I still do, is when an idea or a scene, or it could be dialogue, I'll write it down and then incorporate it. Because I was working full time, so I would use my commute and write at lunchtime. And for me, what I find is the best time for writing is first thing or early in the morning, and then actually sort of 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And if I can do 1,000 words, fantastic. If I can do 2,000 words, great. If I can do 500, that's fine. I'm more interested in, I guess, having a weekly word target, which is usually around, say, 5,000, 5 to 7. If I can do 7, great. But if I can hit 5, then that's good. And when I'm editing, I guess once I get to sort of 20,000 or 30,000 words, I'll print it out. And I know that's bad for the trees, but there's something about having the paper, and then I just go through and, mark it up, and then, have that sort of living Word document, which is just increases. And it just helps me reconnect with the story and, go deeper, I guess. I am a pantser, so I've had to learn, because I'm writing crime fiction, to kind of do a bit of plotting. Yeah. So so for a pantser, for those watching, is someone who doesn't write sequentially. So I'll write this bit, and then I know this bit, and then I know that bit, and then there's this bit over here. And then you sort of connect
You have to stitch it together.
Yeah, so it's very organic, but what it means is it takes a lot longer than if you had sat down and plotted it. So once I get to a certain point, I will plot, but a lot of the times I'm thinking, but why did the murderer do that? Why is this jacket blue? I know it has to be blue, but I don't know why. And then it could be a couple of months, and you're in the shower and you're like, that's why the jacket's blue, because of that and that and that. And then you can get those connections in, which I think it's just the way I operate. But it's I'm more and more I'm learning to trust my subconscious, that my subconscious will reveal it. If I've got that sort of feeling about something, I leave it and just get on with what I do know at the time.
And do you have a kind of, one of the things about murder mysteries is that puzzle element that you talked about before, that you need to kind of add enough crumbs in for it to make sense, but also some red herrings.
Yeah.
I really like the concept of Devon's scribbling on the windows and his little kind of comics on the walls. Is that something that you have to do with your writing, or?
So I have a spreadsheet, and I have a calendar. So you notice, like, the Nancy's are set in December, Nancy business is in April. So I have an actual, and then within each day, I will put what the scene is. And then once I've got enough, sort of, I can then start to put the clues in, and then I can see, okay, you're getting all the clues on one day. Well, that's not going to work. So we need to move this. Or they're doing 20 things in one day and then nothing the next day. And it's like, that's a pretty big day. So it is doing that. And some of it is reverse engineering. I do, I usually, so I have an idea before I, start writing, what the midpoint is, what I want at the end, and also the feeling. And I think that's really important. The emotions that I want the reader to experience, or the characters to experience throughout the story as well. I think that's really important. How I would like readers to feel at the end of a particular story. So I have those markers. I don't go in completely like, I got no idea. but yeah, when it comes to the details, often they'll either reveal themselves as I'm writing the scene, or they'll be, okay, well, I need to know, what the murder weapon is, what I find useful is, once I'm sort of into it, is just for myself, is writing like a 24-hour timeline from the murderer's point of view. And then again, that gives us details and go, okay, well, they were here when the gang was over here, or, because you've got that sort of underlying story, which the reader won't see, but is so critical to crime fiction. Yeah.
I'm aware we've got only 5 minutes left, this has gone so fast.
Yeah.
A couple of questions have come through around the series. So you've talked about in other interviews that you are working on a third book. And I wondered about that, but also there's a question here already that says, can we hope for more than 3?
Well, never say never. I don't want it to be like Cher's farewell tour and then, it keeps. So that's a good question. So yes, I am working on the third. So my agent actually has a standalone adult crime fiction, which is a historical murder mystery. So fingers crossed on that one. But I am working on the third Nancy's, which will be the end of the trilogy. So I have to write it. I feel like to honor the characters and the trilogy that this is going to be the last one. However, if a story came to me for the Nancy's, then absolutely I'd be up for exploring that. But for right now, I need to close off so this trilogy can be, I guess, standalone, if that's the right word.
Yeah. And it feels like there's that story around Wei Fang, Joe,
yes,
Pippi's dad, that needs some closure to it.
Absolutely. And that was when I first came up with the idea of the Nancy's. That was the story that made me realize this is a trilogy. And I've explored that. Like when I was writing Nancy Business, can I make it a duology? And it's like, no, it actually needs to be a trilogy. So yeah, so I want to close that off. And I've also written a short story which is for a crime fiction anthology that will be coming out, I don't know, within the year, hopefully. So it was Australian New Zealand crime authors who have characters in series asking if we could write a short story. So there is I guess, a Nancy's 4, which takes place 1 year from the Nancy's. So yeah, so there will be that as well.
Exciting. And there's rumours that maybe there's a screen adaptation.
Oh, that would be so good. So yes, I've signed an option with Hoodlum. So they have made programs like All My Friends Are Racist, 5 Bedrooms. So they've done work with Stan, which is a streaming service over here. So fingers crossed. If it was, then more likely to be like a streaming TV series, which is perfect, I think, for these characters and for the Nancy's, and with the idea of it being a reoccurring show. So fingers crossed. But yeah, so that's all sort of where we're at this stage. But I certainly also would love to see it filmed in Aotearoa. Yeah, which I think is the idea behind that. They've said they want to very much keep the Kiwi element.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so exciting. There's so many questions, interesting questions coming through the chat, and I haven't even got through half of mine, but we are coming up to 12, so we'll have to chat with you again sometime, because this has just been really lovely and wonderful. And thank you so much for joining us, and sorry to the people who are listening in that I haven't got to all your questions, but we have run out of time. And just thank you so much for chatting with us this morning. Thank you for everyone who's come along. This is our final session for Same for 2022. 2022, yeah, I said that right. There's a lot of twos going on. And we've just really appreciated that we can put on these festivals in these very strange and unusual times and make things work. And this is one of the few Auckland Pride events that are happening, which is exciting for us that we can pull something together, and just so grateful to our sponsors again. I thought I would close off this session and the festival with a karakia to kind of put us, sew this up. I guess that's the wrong metaphor, but this is around kind of may our pathways be cleared and the restrictions that are in our way be moved aside, and we'll go on with our everyday activities, but taking the conversations that we've had for today with us. So kia whakairea te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, ke turu ki whakataha ai, ki turu ki whakataha ai, homie hui tai ki e. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Rob. And
Thanks, Sam.
we'll
Thanks,
see you
everyone.
online. And buy the books. Buy all the books. See you later.